Take it, Sebastian said, pressing the gas can into the stranger's hands. My truck'll make it home on fumes. Your brother might not make it at all. The biker stared at him, this skinny, gray-haired janitor, in a worn uniform, and couldn't find a single word. Sebastian turned away before the man could argue. He already knew what he was giving up. He just couldn't make himself care enough to stop. If you've ever helped someone when you had nothing left to give, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe and stay with me until the very end. You won't see this ending coming. The night shift at Jefferson Middle School ended at 11:15, same as it always did. Sebastian Bennett punched out, stuffed his time card back into the slot, and walked to the parking lot without saying goodbye to anyone. Not because he was unfriendly, because there was no one left on the crew who bothered to wait around. The other janitors cleared out fast younger men with somewhere to be families to get home to maybe a cold beer waiting on a counter. Sebastian had none of that. What he had was a 2003 Ford Ranger with a cracked windshield, a heater that worked maybe 40% of the time, and a drive home that he had been calculating in his head for the last 3 hours. 1.5 gallons. That's what he had left in the red plastic can sitting in the truck bed. He'd siphoned it from the lawnmower fuel at the school's maintenance shed 2 weeks ago, a decision that still sat sideways in his chest. Not because anyone had noticed, not because he planned to steal, but because a man who spent 40 years trying to do things right had reached the point where he was siphoning lawnmower gas just to get to a job that paid $11.40 an hour. He sat in the truck for a moment before starting it, not resting, calculating. Home was 23 miles. The Ranger got about 17 miles to the gallon when the engine wasn't fighting him, which it almost always was. He'd put in just under a gallon at lunch, topped off from the can. That left maybe half a gallon in the can, maybe a little more. Enough to get home tonight, just barely. Enough to get to work tomorrow morning if he drove slow and didn't run the heat. He couldn't afford not to run the heat. It was 38 degrees outside and falling. All right, he said to nobody. All right. He turned the key. The engine coughed, caught, held. He pulled out of the lot. Sebastian had lived in Bakersfield his whole life, 62 years of it, and he knew these roads the way you know a scar, every curve, every bad patch of asphalt, every stretch of empty highway where you felt the most alone at night. Highway 155 was the worst of them. Long and dark and almost completely deserted after 10 running out through the flat land east of town, where there were no street lights and no shoulder to speak of, just 2 lanes of cracked blacktop and the dark pressing in from both sides. He drove it every night. He had learned to make peace with the drive. He used to use the time to think about Carol, his wife. They'd been married 31 years before the cancer took her, and he still caught himself composing things to tell her, things he saw during the day, things Danny said, some small, funny thing that happened at work. He'd catch himself and then remember, and the remembering still hit like a door swinging open onto empty air. 2 years and it still did that. Danny was the reason he got up every morning. His grandson was 16 and he was the only thing Sebastian had left in the world that felt like forward motion. The boy lived with him in the trailer on Crescent Road, had been living there since his mother, Sebastian's daughter, Renee, had made a series of decisions that took her somewhere Sebastian couldn't follow and somewhere Danny didn't need to go. The trailer was small, drafty, and the propane bill was $60 more a month than Sebastian budgeted for. Danny never complained. That was the thing about the boy that broke Sebastian's heart a little every day. Danny never complained about anything. He did his homework at the kitchen table without being asked. He made dinner twice a week. He kept his corner of the trailer neat and quiet, and he never once said out loud what Sebastian knew he must be thinking, which was that this was not the life a 16-year-old was supposed to have. Sebastian pressed his foot a little lighter on the gas. 17 miles per gallon. Every 10th of a mile counted. The dashboard clock said 11:34. Danny would be asleep. Sebastian would check on him when he got in. He always did, stood in the doorway for just a moment until he could see the rise and fall of the boy's breathing. Old habit. Probably embarrassing if Danny ever caught him doing it. Sebastian planned to keep doing it anyway. He was 12 miles from home when he saw the bike. It was pulled off onto what passed for a shoulder, really just a few feet of packed dirt before the drainage ditch, and the headlight was on, but not moving, casting a long yellow wash across the dark road. Sebastian's first instinct was to note it, file it, and keep driving. People broke down. People dealt with it. That was between them and whatever roadside assistance they thought to call. Then he got close enough to see the man standing beside it. Even from 50 yards out, the size of the man registered. He wasn't just tall. He was the kind of big that made you recalibrate your sense of scale, wide across the shoulders, thick through the chest, with arms that suggested he had spent years doing something physical and unforgiving. He was wearing a cut. Sebastian had lived in Bakersfield long enough to know what a cut was. The leather vest, the patches, the colors. Even at this distance, even in this dark, Sebastian could read the top rocker. Hell's Angels. He took his foot off the gas without meaning to. Every reasonable thing in Sebastian Bennett's 62 years of reasonable living told him to keep driving. Not out of cruelty, out of common sense. You didn't stop at midnight on a deserted highway for a man you didn't know, and you especially didn't stop for a man built like a weapon who belonged to a motorcycle club that had its own FBI file. You called 911 if you felt guilty about it, and you kept moving, and you were grateful you had the sense God gave you. Sebastian's truck slowed down. He told himself he was just getting a better look. He told himself he'd assess from a distance and then decide. His foot moved to the brake almost without his knowledge, and the Ranger rolled to a stop about 30 feet past where the biker stood. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, hands tight on the wheel, looking in the rearview mirror. The man hadn't moved, hadn't reached for anything, hadn't taken a step toward the truck. He was just standing there with his hands at his sides looking at the truck, and even in the bad mirror light, Sebastian could read something in that stillness that wasn't menace. It was exhaustion. It was the look of a man who had been standing there a long time and had run out of options and knew it. Sebastian's wife had looked like that near the end. Not the same, nothing like the same. But the quality of that particular kind of tired, he knew it on sight, and something in his chest turned over. He got out of the truck. "Hey," Sebastian called. He kept about 20 feet of distance. "You okay?" The man looked at him. Up close now that the truck's headlights caught him properly, he was older than Sebastian had first thought, maybe mid-40s, maybe older, with a heavy gray-shot beard and lines around his eyes that didn't come from easy living. He had a bruise beginning to form along his left jaw that Sebastian didn't ask about. "Fuel," the man said. His voice was low, rough around the edges. "She's completely dry." "You call anyone." Phone died. A beat. Before I thought to call anyone useful. Sebastian looked at the bike. A Harley, a big one, well-maintained, the kind of machine that someone had put serious money and serious time into. It sat inert and useless on the shoulder like a sleeping animal. "There's a gas station back about 8 miles, Sebastian said. "I know that." The man didn't say it with attitude. He said it the way a man says something he's already thought about until it stopped being useful. "I've been standing here an hour. Nobody stops on this road." "No," Sebastian agreed. "They don't." He stood there, 20 feet of dark air between them, the truck idling behind him, the red plastic gas can sitting in the bed. A fact he was aware of the way you're aware of something you're trying not to think about. The biker watched him. He wasn't pushing, wasn't angling. He looked like a man who had resigned himself to whatever came next and was just waiting to find out what it was. "What's your name?" Sebastian asked. "Mike. Mike Gallagher." He didn't offer his hand. "People call me Iron Mike." "Sebastian Bennett." He didn't move any closer. "Why, Iron Mike?" Something crossed the man's face, not quite a smile. "Long story." Sebastian nodded. He looked down the road both ways. Nothing. Not a set of headlights in either direction. Just the black flat open of the highway and the cold coming down. "Where are you trying to get to?" he asked. Iron Mike was quiet for a moment, and Sebastian noticed that the quiet was different from the previous ones. This one had weight in it. Cost. "Mercy, General," Mike said. "My brother's in ICU. They called me 3 hours ago." He stopped. His heart, they said, another stop. He looked away from Sebastian out into the dark beside the road. "They said if I want to see him, I should come now." Sebastian didn't say anything. "I was 60 miles out when she ran dry," Mike said. "I thought I had enough. I was wrong." Sebastian stood very still. He was doing the math again, but it was a different kind of math now. And he hated that he was doing it, hated the part of his brain that was still running calculations while this man was standing here telling him his brother was dying in a hospital. He knew Mercy General. He knew the ICU waiting room on the 3rd floor, the particular quality of the light in there, the sound the elevator made. He knew how it felt to sit in one of those plastic chairs at 2 in the morning, wondering if the person you loved most in the world was going to make it to sunrise. Carol had been in that ICU for 9 days. I got about 1.5 gallons in a can in my truck, Sebastian said. His voice came out even. He wasn't sure how. It's not much. Mike turned to look at him. His eyes were sharp, and Sebastian realized the exhaustion hadn't touched the eyes. They were alert, careful, the eyes of a man who had learned to read situations fast and had made a lot of important reads in his life. That enough to get me to Mercy General? Mike asked. Sebastian worked it out in his head. Mercy General was on the north end of Bakersfield. From here, maybe 15 miles. The Harley was more fuel efficient than the Ranger. Probably 1.5 gallons might get him there and then some, and leave Sebastian with nothing. Sebastian didn't answer the question directly. He walked back to his truck, reached into the bed, and picked up the red plastic can. He walked back to where Mike was standing and held it out. "Take it," Sebastian said. His voice was steady. He made it steady. "My truck will make it home on fumes. Your brother might not make it at all." Mike didn't take it right away. He looked at the can, then at Sebastian, and his face did something complicated that Sebastian didn't try to decode. "Man," Mike said quietly, "I don't—" He stopped, started again. "You don't know me." "No," Sebastian kept the can extended. "I don't." "I could be—" Mike stopped again, and Sebastian could see him working through something, wrestling with a thing he wasn't used to wrestling with. "People don't stop on this road. Not for me." "I noticed that." "Why'd you stop?" Sebastian thought about it. He could hear the cold and the dark and the nothing all around them. He thought about the way Mike had looked when he first saw him, that specific wait in the stillness, that look of a man who had exhausted his options and was just waiting. He thought about Carol and the ICU and the 9 days in the elevator sound. "I know that hospital," Sebastian said. "I know what it's like to need to get there." Mike looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the can. He didn't say thank you right away. Sebastian appreciated that. Sometimes thank you too fast means nothing at all. Mike walked to the Harley and started working. His hands were fast and competent. He'd done this before, fueled the bike in the field, and the practiced efficiency of it told Sebastian something about the kind of life this man had lived. While he worked, he talked, and Sebastian stood nearby because the night was cold and the truck was warm, but walking back to it felt wrong right now. "His name is Tommy," Mike said without looking up. "Younger brother, he's 41. The can tilted. Fuel moved. "He's been on the list for a bypass for 6 months. Insurance issues. You know how that goes." "Yeah," Sebastian said. "I know how that goes." "They said the blockage got worse. Fast." Mike sealed the Harley's tank. He stood up and held the empty can back out to Sebastian. There was something ceremonial about the gesture, deliberate, like he was making sure Sebastian got it back, like that mattered to him. "He's a good man, better than me, probably." Sebastian took the can. That's not a hard bar to clear, iron Mike. It came out drier than he intended. He almost apologized. Mike laughed. A short bark of sound surprised out of him. "No, it's not." He looked at Sebastian, and the laughter settled into something else, something older and more complicated. "What do you need for this? Tell me what you need." Sebastian shook his head. "Go see your brother." "I don't operate that way," Mike said. His voice had shifted slightly, flat and certain in a way that suggested this was a statement of character, not negotiation. "I don't take something for nothing." "You're not taking something for nothing. You're taking gas you're going to need from someone who can manage without it." Sebastian made himself believe this as he said it. "There's a difference. What's your name again?" "Sebastian Bennett." "Sebastian." Mike said it deliberately like he was filing it. "Where do you live?" Sebastian told him because something about the question felt important to answer, and because lying at this particular moment felt like it would cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. Mike nodded once. He reached into his vest, and Sebastian kept very still, and Mike pulled out a wallet. He thumbed through it and held out a folded stack of bills without counting them. Sebastian kept his hands at his sides. "Take the money," Mike said. "No." "Sebastian, I didn't give you the gas for money." His voice came out harder than he meant it to, and he softened it. "I gave it because your brother's in the ICU and you need to get there. That's the whole reason. Money's got nothing to do with it." Mike looked at him with those sharp, careful eyes, and Sebastian could feel himself being assessed. Measured, filed in some internal system, this man kept that Sebastian had no knowledge of and no context for. It was not a comfortable feeling. But Sebastian held his ground because he'd meant what he said, and the only thing worse than giving away his last gallon of gas on an empty highway at midnight was giving it away and then taking money for it and turning it into a transaction. This was not a transaction. Mike put the wallet away. "Then I owe you something I can't pay back tonight," he said. "You know that." "You don't owe me anything," Sebastian said. "Go." Mike looked at him one more moment. Then he swung onto the Harley and the engine turned over on the first try, the deep Harley growl that Sebastian felt in his sternum, and without another word, Iron Mike Gallagher pulled onto the highway and accelerated away his taillight, shrinking to a red point, and then disappearing in the dark. Sebastian stood on the shoulder of Highway 155 and listened to the silence move back in. He stood there for a longer time than made any practical sense. Something had just happened, and he wasn't entirely sure what to call it. He was cold. He was tired down to his marrow. He had an empty gas can in his hand and a truck that was going to push its luck, getting him home, and tomorrow morning he needed to be at Jefferson Middle School at 6:30 for the building opening shift. And he did not have enough money in his checking account to fill the tank properly, and Danny needed new shoes because the ones he had were separating at the sole and the propane bill was past due by 11 days, and none of it was a secret he was keeping from himself. He put the gas can in the truck bed. He got behind the wheel. The Ranger started. He breathed out. He pulled onto the highway heading west, and he drove careful and slow, feathering the wand, watching the fuel gauge sit below the E-line, where it had been sitting for 2 days, and he talked to Carol in his head the way he sometimes did when the math got too hard to hold alone. "I gave him the gas," he told her. He imagined what she would say. He knew her well enough after 31 years to know the rhythm of her responses, the particular way she had of asking questions that were really statements. She would have asked, "Did you think about it first?" He would have said, "I was still thinking about it when I handed him the can." She would have said, "That's not thinking about it. That's just living with a delay." He almost smiled. The truck held together. The miles clicked down. When he turned off the highway onto Crescent Road, he checked the clock, 12:47 a.m. He was tired enough that the edges of things were soft. He pulled up to the trailer and cut the engine. Sat for a moment. The propane heater inside would still be running. He could see the faint yellow glow around the window, and Danny would be asleep with his one good blanket pulled up, and the trailer would be warm enough. Just barely warm enough. Sebastian got out of the truck and went inside. He checked on Danny. The boy was out cold, face half buried in the pillow, one arm hanging off the edge of the narrow bed, breathing steady. He'd left his jeans on, which he did sometimes when he was too tired to bother, and his school books were open on the floor beside him, which meant he'd been studying until he couldn't keep his eyes open. Sebastian stood in the doorway for a moment, just long enough. Then he went to his own bed and lay down, and the cold of the trailer pressed in from all sides, and he thought about a man named Iron Mike Gallagher riding through the dark toward a hospital, and a brother who might or might not still be breathing. And he thought about whether he'd done the right thing or the dumb thing, and he thought that sometimes the right thing and the dumb thing were the same exact decision, and you just had to make peace with it. He thought about the fuel gauge sitting below E. He thought about the 6:30 shift. He thought, "We'll figure it out. We always figure it out." He was asleep before he finished the thought. He didn't dream about Carol that night. He dreamed about driving an empty highway and the road going on in the dark, and the headlights showing just enough road ahead to take one more mile and then one more after that, and the engine somehow impossibly still running. Sebastian woke up at 5:40 with the kind of clarity that only comes from a bad night's sleep. The kind where your brain never fully let go, just idled in the dark, running numbers it couldn't solve. He lay still for 30 seconds. The trailer was cold in the way that meant the propane had cycled down overnight. His breath was visible. He counted what he knew the fuel gauge was below E. The drive to Jefferson Middle School was 11 miles. He had no cash until Thursday's direct deposit, and Thursday was 4 days away. He got up anyway because that's what you did. He dressed in the dark so he wouldn't wake Danny. Thermal undershirt, the work uniform that was starting to fray at the collar, the boots with the resoled right heel. He moved quietly, efficiently, the way a man moves when he has been managing tight quarters and tighter margins for long enough that it becomes instinct. In the kitchen, if you could call, 4 feet of counter in a 2-burner range a kitchen, he started the coffee because the coffee was non-negotiable. While it brewed, he did the math again. The same math, looking for a number that wasn't there. He could ask Phil Donahue, the day shift lead, to spot him enough for gas. Phil was decent. Phil would probably say yes. But Sebastian had already borrowed $40 from Phil in October and paid it back slow, and there was a limit to how many times a man could stand with his hand out before the decency in the other man's eyes started looking like something else. He could ask Danny's school counselor, Ms. Reyes, about the emergency fund she'd mentioned once in passing. But that felt like the kind of door you only opened when things were truly gone. He poured the coffee. He stood at the counter and drank it standing up because sitting down felt like surrender. Danny appeared in the hallway at 6:10, still in yesterday's jeans hair, going in 3 directions, squinting at the light. "You're up early," Danny said. "Always up early." "It's earlier than always." The boy moved to the coffee pot and found it empty and looked at Sebastian with an expression of genuine betrayal. "I'll make more." Sebastian started the second pot. "Go get dressed." "I am dressed." "You slept in those." Danny looked down at himself. "They're not wrinkled." "Daniel." The boy turned and went back down the hall without argument. Sebastian listened to the sound of drawers opening and closing and felt the specific weight of love that he couldn't put words to, the kind that was made up entirely of small moments and had nothing to do with speeches or occasions. Just the sound of his grandson getting dressed in a cold trailer at 6 in the morning, trusting without question that the day would be okay. Sebastian had to make sure the day was okay. He left at 6:15. The Ranger turned over on the third try, which was one more than usual, and he pulled out of Crescent Road and onto the highway. With the fuel gauge needle sitting so far below E, it had basically given up the argument. He drove 20 miles an hour under the speed limit. He talked to the engine under his breath. He made deals with it the way you make deals with things that have been running past their warranty. He made it 4 miles before the truck coughed. He made it 4 miles and 2/10 before it coughed again harder, and then the engine simply quit, smooth and final. No drama, just gone, and the Ranger coasted to the shoulder and stopped with a gentleness that felt almost apologetic. Sebastian sat with his hands on the wheel. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Okay." He got out of the truck. He had his phone, an old Android with a cracked screen that still made calls, and he used it to dial Jefferson Middle School. The phone rang 4 times before the overnight line picked up, and Sebastian left a message for the front office saying he was having vehicle trouble and would be late, that he would get there as soon as he could, that he was sorry for the inconvenience. Then he started walking. 11 miles was a long walk. He knew that. He also knew he had no other option, and standing on the shoulder of the road feeling sorry about it was not going to get him to work any faster. So he walked. His boots were good, at least the Resoled right heel held, and the morning was cold but dry, and he had done harder things than walk 11 miles. He told himself that while he walked. He got about 3 miles in when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered because he always answered unknown numbers. Now, Danny's school sometimes called from different lines, and you never wanted to miss the school. "Is this Sebastian Bennett?" A man's voice. Deep, measured. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Darren Walsh, principal at Jefferson Middle." A pause that had something careful in it. "Mr. Bennett, I'm calling because you didn't come in this morning." "I left a message," Sebastian said. "I had vehicle trouble. I'm about 3 miles out. I'm walking in." "I understand that." Another pause. "Mr. Bennett, I need to be direct with you. We've had a situation with scheduling this week, and the district is making some staffing decisions. I've been asked to inform you that your position has been eliminated effective today." Sebastian stopped walking. "Effective today," he repeated. "I'm sorry, the timing is, I understand it's not ideal. HR will reach out about your final check and any accrued—" "I've worked at that school for 9 years, Sebastian said. Silence on the line. The principal's breathing. "I know that, Mr. Bennett. I do. This is a district-level decision. I don't—" 9 years. He wasn't arguing. He just needed to say it. "Okay." He swallowed. "Thank you for calling." He hung up. He stood on the side of the road with his phone in his hand and the cold morning pressing on him from every direction, and he stood very still while something large and dark moved through his chest. Not panic, not anger exactly. Something older and quieter than anger. The kind of feeling you get when the last number in the math finally comes up wrong and there's no more calculating to do. He stood there for 60 seconds, maybe 90. Then he started walking again. Not toward Jefferson Middle School. He turned around and started walking home because home was 3 miles behind him and work was 8 miles ahead, and he no longer had a reason to go to work, and the cold was getting serious, and Danny would be leaving for school soon, and Sebastian needed to be there when he left. He needed that small, ordinary thing more than he'd needed anything in recent memory. He walked and he did not let himself think too far ahead. 1 mile at a time. One problem at a time. By the time he got back to the trailer, Danny was gone. Of course he was. The boy had a bus to catch, and he caught it without being reminded because that was Danny. Sebastian went inside and stood in the kitchen and looked at the second pot of coffee sitting cold on the burner and poured himself a cup and didn't heat it up. He sat down at the table. First time he'd sat down all morning. He thought about Carol. He thought about the 9 years at Jefferson, the early mornings, the building opening routines, the particular smell of industrial cleaner and old hallway carpet that had become as familiar as anything in his life. He thought about the kids he'd watched pass through that school, the ones who said good morning and the ones who didn't, the ones who had it hard and the ones who didn't know yet what hard looked like. He'd liked that job. He'd liked being useful in a way that was simple and real. He thought about the gas can, the empty gas can in his truck bed, his truck that was now sitting on the shoulder of Highway 12 with its engine dead and its usefulness gone. He thought about Iron Mike Gallagher riding through the dark toward a hospital. He wondered if Tommy Gallagher was still alive. He wondered why that question felt relevant to anything. And then he stopped wondering and just let it sit there because sometimes things are relevant in ways you can't diagram, and you either accept that or you don't. His phone buzzed again. Different unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Mr. Bennett, a woman's voice, warm, professional. This is Linda Howell from Consolidated Towing. We have a 2003 Ford Ranger registered to you on Route 12. Do you want us to bring it in? How much? Sebastian asked. Tow fee is $95 to our yard, and we can take a look at. I don't have $95 right now, Sebastian said. He said it the way he said all hard things straightforwardly, without apology or decoration, because making it complicated didn't make it less true. How long can it sit before you charge a storage fee? A pause. 48 hours. Okay. He did the math. Thursday was 4 days. Can I have 72? Another pause longer. I'll note 50 hours, the woman said. Her voice had changed slightly. We're not busy this week. Thank you, Sebastian said. He put the phone on the table. He looked at it for a while. The thing about collapse Sebastian had learned first during Carol's illness, and now in this slow different version of the same lesson, was that it didn't happen all at once. It happened in increments. A truck that needed repairs you couldn't afford. A fuel gauge that crept down. A job that disappeared on a Tuesday morning with a phone call that lasted 4 minutes. Each thing by itself was manageable maybe, but they didn't come by themselves. They came together and they came fast, and the question was never whether you could handle any single one. It was whether you could stay standing while they all hit at once. Sebastian was still standing. He wasn't sure for how much longer. He got up, washed his coffee cup, and started making a list. Not a hopeful list, not a solutions list, just an accounting. What he had, what he owed, what the gaps were. He owed this to himself and to Danny to know exactly where they were, even when where they were was bad. He was halfway through the list when he heard the sound. It started low, like something far away that you feel before you hear a vibration in the air in the walls, in the floorboards. Sebastian lifted his head. He'd lived in Bakersfield his whole life, and he recognized the sound of a single motorcycle. This wasn't that. This was something larger, something that built and kept building. And his first thought was that it was a truck convoy on the highway, but the highway was 3 miles east. And this was close, this was getting closer, and then it was right outside. He went to the door and opened it. Iron Mike Gallagher was standing in his driveway. Not alone. Behind Mike, stretching down Crescent Road further than Sebastian could see from his doorway, were motorcycles. Parked in a line engine, still running chrome, catching the weak morning light. 8, 10, 12 he counted, and lost count and stopped counting. At least 2 dozen machines, maybe more, and the men sitting on them were large and quiet and wearing cuts, and the sound of all those engines together was something that went through your chest cavity like a physical force. Sebastian stood in his doorway and stared. Mike walked toward him. He looked different in daylight, still big, still wearing the cut, but the desperation of the night before was gone. In its place was something settled and deliberate, the look of a man who had decided something and arrived to say it. "Morning," Mike said. "Morning," Sebastian said. He looked past Mike at the line of bikes that seemed to extend past the end of the road. "You brought some friends. Brothers?" Mike stopped at the base of the porch step. "Different thing." "Right." Sebastian kept his voice level. His heart was doing something complicated in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "How's Tommy?" Something moved through Mike's face. Fast, but Sebastian caught it. "He made it through the night," Mike said. "They did an emergency procedure at 3 a.m. Doctor says he's stable." He stopped. "Because I got there when I did." Sebastian exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. "That's good." "Yeah." Mike looked at him. "It is." He put his boot on the first porch step, not coming up, just closing the distance slightly. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. All right? You lost your job this morning." It wasn't a question. Sebastian went still. "How do you know that?" "Because after I left that hospital at 4 a.m., I started making calls." Mike's voice was flat and factual. "I know people, and I wanted to know who you were." Sebastian felt something shift in his chest, not quite alarm, not quite anything he had a clean name for. "That's a lot of effort for a stranger." "You're not a stranger." Mike said it simply. "A stranger drives past you on the highway. You stopped." He looked at Sebastian directly. "And then I found out about your truck and your job. And I thought about what you told me last night, that you gave me that voice because you knew that hospital, because you knew what it was like to need to get there. And I started doing the math on what that gallon and a half actually cost you." Sebastian didn't say anything. "You didn't just give me gas, boss," Mike said. "You gave me your way to work. You gave me your income. You gave me your truck near enough because without the gas, your truck is just metal." His jaw was tight. "You gave me all of that, and you wouldn't take $40. "I didn't give you my truck," Sebastian said. "The truck gave out on its own." "Don't do that." "Mike, don't make it smaller than it is." Mike's voice came out harder than he probably intended, and he pulled it back. "I got brothers behind me who want to know what I know. And what I know is that a man with nothing gave everything to get me to my brother, and he didn't ask for a thing, and this morning he lost his bum and his truck in the same hour." He paused. "In our world, that kind of thing gets answered." Sebastian looked at him, at the line of motorcycles behind him, at the men on those machines who were sitting very still and watching this conversation with a quality of attention that made Sebastian aware that this moment meant something to them, something specific, something that operated by rules Sebastian didn't fully know. "I don't want a reward," Sebastian said. "It's not a reward," Mike said it without heat. "Rewards are for things you do because you're hoping to get something back. What you did," he stopped. "Tried again. What you did was just right for no reason, for a stranger in the dark." His voice went rough for a moment, just a moment, and he controlled it. "My brother's breathing this morning because of a school janitor from Bakersfield who couldn't afford to give away his last gallon of bite but gave it anyway." He looked straight at Sebastian. "That doesn't go unanswered. It can't." Sebastian stood in his doorway and felt the weight of the morning. The call from the principal, the dead truck, the cold walk, the list of numbers on the kitchen table. And he looked at Iron Mike Gallagher in the impossible line of machines stretching down his road, and he felt something he hadn't felt in so long, he almost didn't recognize it. He felt like something was about to change. He didn't know the shape of it yet. He didn't know what these men were about to say or do, and a part of him that had been cautious for 62 years was still running its calculations, still assessing, still wondering whether this was something he should be worried about. But a larger part, the part that had gotten out of his truck on a dark highway at midnight because a man looked tired in a way Sebastian recognized, that part was quiet and still and paying attention. "What do you want to do?" Sebastian asked. Mike looked over his shoulder at the men behind him. Then he turned back to Sebastian, and for the first time since he'd walked up the driveway, the deliberateness in his face broke open into something that was almost a smile. "We want to start with your truck," Mike said. Sebastian came down off the porch step. Not because he'd decided to, not because he'd thought it through and arrived at a conclusion. His feet just moved the way they'd moved when he pulled the truck over on Highway 155, before the reasoning caught up, before the calculating brain had a chance to veto the part of him that still operated on something older and simpler than math. "Show me," he said. Mike turned and walked back toward the road, and Sebastian followed him. And that was the moment, though. Sebastian wouldn't recognize it as such until much later, that everything began to move in a different direction. The men on the bikes were watching him. Not hostile, not performing, just watching with that particular quality of attention that Sebastian had noticed from the doorway. Like this moment had weight for them, like they'd come here knowing what they were going to see and were seeing it now and confirming something. A few of them nodded when Sebastian walked past. Small nods. He nodded back because it was the honest thing to do. Mike stopped at the edge of the road and pulled out his phone. He made a call, said 3 words Sebastian didn't catch, and hung up. Then he looked at Sebastian. "Truck's being brought in," he said. "Ricky's on it." "I didn't authorize a tow," Sebastian said. "No, you didn't." Mike said it without apology. "What's wrong with the engine?" Sebastian told him the rough idle, the hard starts the way it had been burning oil since August, the cough that had started 2 weeks ago and gotten progressively worse. He said it straight the way he'd listed his debts on the kitchen table that morning. No drama, no softening, just the facts about a truck that had been running past its ability to run for a long time. Mike listened without interrupting. When Sebastian finished, Mike said, "Fuel pump. Probably the injectors too. Maybe the alternator given what you're describing." "That's what I figured. You get a quote." "I got a quote in September." Sebastian paused. $1,100. Mike nodded slowly. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at Sebastian with an expression that was doing its own accounting. "Come inside," Sebastian said, because standing on the road felt wrong, and because the cold was serious now, and because whatever this was, it wasn't a conversation for a driveway. "I'll make coffee." Mike looked at him. "You're inviting me inside. You drove to my house at 7 in the morning with 24 motorcycles. Least I can do is offer coffee." Something in Mike's face shifted. Not a smile exactly, the precursor to one. "Yeah," he said. "All right." He said something to the men on the bike. Sebastian didn't hear what, and followed Sebastian up the porch and through the door. Inside the trailer, Sebastian made the coffee while Mike stood in the middle of the small living space and looked around in a way that was careful and deliberate, not invasive. He was taking inventory. Sebastian understood the same way Sebastian had taken inventory of Mike, on the highway, reading what was visible to understand what wasn't. The kitchen table with the list of numbers on it, the 2 coffee cups on the drying rack, the school photo of Danny taped to the inside of the cabinet door, which Sebastian had put there years ago, so he'd see it first thing every morning when he got out a mug. Mike saw that photo. Sebastian watched him see it. "That's your grandson?" Mike asked. "Danny, he's 16. Just the 2 of you here. Just the 2 of us." Mike was quiet. He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down, and the chair looked small under him, and Sebastian had a moment of pure absurdist awareness of what his life had become, making coffee for an Iron Mike Gallagher of the Hells Angels in a trailer on Crescent Road on a Tuesday morning after losing his job. Carol would have found this unbelievable. She also would have immediately started asking Mike questions about himself, because that was Carol. She could find the human being inside any situation faster than anyone Sebastian had ever known. He missed that about her. He missed having someone who made the world feel approachable. He poured 2 cups and sat down across from Mike. Mike wrapped his hands around the mug. His hands were large, scarred across the knuckles in the way that suggested their history without explaining it. He looked at the paper on the table, Sebastian's list, and Sebastian didn't move it because there was nothing on that paper he was ashamed of. Just numbers. Just the truth. "How long has it been like this?" Mike asked. "Since Carol died, my wife." Sebastian drank his coffee. 2 years. We had savings, not much, but enough. Medical bills took most of it. The rest went to keeping things together while I figured out the next move. He set down the cup. "I'm still figuring out the next move." "What did you do before the janitorial job?" Sebastian looked at him. "Why, because I want to know who I'm talking to." "Fair enough." "I was a mechanic," Sebastian said. 22 years. Had my own shop, Bennett Auto, over on Pierce Street. Had 3 employees, decent clientele. When Carol got sick, I sold it to cover the first round of treatment costs. He said this without self-pity as a fact. By the time the second round came, there was nothing left to sell, so I took the school job because it had health insurance. Mike set his mug down. He set it down with a precision that felt deliberate, like he was making sure his hands had something to do while he processed what he'd just heard. He looked at Sebastian with those sharp, careful eyes, and something in his expression had changed. Something had gone still and focused in a way that made Sebastian pay attention. "You're a mechanic," Mike said. "Was. Are." Mike said it like a correction. "Skills don't expire." "Tools do," Sebastian said. "Shop space costs money. Certifications need renewing. You need capital to—" He stopped himself because he was explaining something Mike already understood, and the explanation was starting to sound like excuses, and Sebastian hated excuses. "Yes, I'm a mechanic." Mike leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, actually looked at it like he was running something in his head, and then he looked back at Sebastian. "I'm going to tell you something," Mike said, "and I need you to hear it before you argue with me, because I know you're going to argue." "I'm listening." "The guys outside, they're not here because I told them to be. I didn't issue an order. I made one phone call last night from a hospital waiting room, and I told 3 people what happened on that highway." He paused. "By 5 this morning, I had 47 texts from brothers asking for your address." Sebastian was quiet. "You want to know what I told them about you?" Mike continued. "I said a 62-year-old school janitor with a dead truck and $11 to his name stopped on a dark highway and gave me his last gallon of gas because I needed to get to my brother, and he wouldn't take $1 for it. That's all I said." His voice dropped slightly. 47 texts, Sebastian, at 5 in the morning. Sebastian looked at his coffee cup. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. "In our world," Mike said, "what you did has a name. We don't use the word lightly. It means you saw a man in trouble and you chose him over yourself for no reason, except that it was right." He stopped. "You know what that's worth to us." "I gave a man a gallon of gas," Sebastian said. "You gave me my brother." Mike's voice went flat and unambiguous. "Tommy is breathing because I got there when I did. The doctor was straight with me another hour, and the blockage would have caused irreparable damage. Maybe killed him." He held Sebastian's gaze. "You gave me my brother. I don't have a price for that. I don't know a man who does." The silence in the trailer was different now, fuller. Sebastian heard the sound of a truck pulling up outside a heavy engine, a trailer rig. He heard voices, the clank of equipment, the tow truck bringing his Ranger home. "What are you planning?" Sebastian asked. "First your truck gets fixed," Mike said. "Ricky Torrance, one of my brothers, he's the best engine man in the valley. He's going to go through that Ranger top to bottom and fix everything that's broken, parts and labor handled." Sebastian started to speak. I said, "Hear me out." Mike's voice wasn't hard, it was just certain. "Second, you lost your job this morning because your truck broke down, because you gave me your fuel. That's a straight line. I drew it. I'm not pretending I didn't." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Third, I started making calls at 5 a.m. about something bigger. Something I want to talk to you about. But I need you to accept the truck first." Mike. Sebastian. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. 2 men in their 50s with complicated histories in the same quality of stubbornness, and the moment stretched long enough to become something. "I don't take charity," Sebastian said finally. "This isn't charity." Mike said it hard and clean. "Charity is when someone feels sorry for you. This is a debt. I owe you. My brothers owe you because you helped one of us. That's different, and you need to understand it's different." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. He heard the sounds outside, engines, voices, the mechanical business of men who knew what they were doing with their hands. His truck being dealt with, without his permission, without his having any say in it. The old pride in him wanted to object. The same pride that had kept him from calling 911 and driving past Mike on the highway, the pride that believed a man handled his own business and didn't put himself in anyone's debt, and didn't accept things he hadn't earned. But he had earned this. That was what he couldn't argue around. He had stood on a dark highway and given everything he had left and walked home in the cold and lost his job in the same morning. And the man sitting across from him had tracked him down and shown up with brothers because what Sebastian had done was real. And it mattered, and these men didn't deal in fiction. Danny needed new shoes. The propane bill was 11 days past due. The towing company had given him 50 hours. All right, Sebastian said. Mike nodded once, like that settled something. Now tell me the bigger thing, Sebastian said. Mike looked at him. He picked up his coffee cup, drank, set it down. How long since you worked on an engine? For pay 8 years. For Danny's car, when he had one, his mother's car, actually piece of garbage. But I kept it running maybe 18 months ago. You keep up with it, the trade, the changes. I read, Sebastian said. Old habit, shop manuals, trade publications. I know the newer systems, the diagnostics. He paused. I don't have the equipment anymore, but the knowledge doesn't leave. Mike nodded slowly. There's a space, he said, on Beale Street, couple miles from here. Used to be a transmission shop, closed down 3 years ago. The owner's a guy named Curtis Webb. He's been sitting on it, can't sell it, property taxes, eating him alive. He watched Sebastian carefully. I talked to Curtis at 6 this morning. Sebastian went very still. He's willing to sign a lease, Mike said. 12 months option to buy. Rate that works. The kitchen was absolutely quiet. You talked to the owner of a commercial property at 6 in the morning, Sebastian said slowly. Curtis owes me a thing or two. Mike said it without elaboration. The space has a 2-post lift that still works, needs some electrical, has a compressor that needs a new motor. Other than that, it's bones and concrete and 4 walls. Sebastian stared at him. I don't have capital, Sebastian said. I don't have tools. I don't have equipment beyond what fits in a toolbox. I don't have brothers, Mike said. Oh, Sebastian stopped. I have brothers, Mike repeated. Who have tools? They don't use equipment. They've been meaning to sell connections to parts suppliers. He leaned forward. And I have brothers who have vehicles that need work, and those brothers have friends. And in this town, a mechanic who does honest work at a fair price and who a Hell's Angel will personally vouch for. He stopped. Let that sentence finish itself. Sebastian understood what he was being offered. He understood it completely, and the understanding was so large and so sudden that he had to be careful with it, had to hold it steady and not let it tip him over, because tipping over in front of this man was not something he was prepared to do. Why? Sebastian asked. His voice was even. He made it even. Not the debt, I understand the debt, but this is bigger than the debt. He gestured at nothing meaning everything. This is a shop. This is a livelihood. This is more than a gallon of Woost's worth. Mike was quiet for a moment. My father, he said finally, was a mechanic in Fresno. Had a shop for 30 years. Good man, honest man, worked himself to the bone. He stopped. When he got sick, he had nothing. No savings, no fallback, nothing. Because every time someone came to him with a hard luck story, he fixed their car on credit that never got paid back. Because he couldn't say no to a person who needed help. He looked at the table. I watched that man lose everything, and I was 22 years old, and I didn't know how to stop it. Silence. You remind me of him, Mike said. And I was in a position last night where I was the person who needed help, and you were the person who gave it anyway. His jaw was tight. I'm not 22 anymore. I know how to fix some things now that I couldn't fix then. Sebastian looked at this man, this large, weathered, complicated man with his heavy cut, in his Hell's Angels patch, and his father who was a mechanic, and his brother who was breathing this morning because of a gallon of gas on a dark highway. And he felt the specific weight of a moment that, even while you're inside, it is going to matter for a long time. I'd need to be the one running it, Sebastian said. My shop, my rules, my prices. Wouldn't have it any other way. I won't cut corners. Not for anybody. Not for your guys. Not for anyone. Mike almost smiled. Good. And I want the lease into my name. Sebastian said it quietly, but with the full weight of 62 years of understanding what his name on a document meant. Not yours, mine. Already told Curtis that, Mike said. Outside, Sebastian heard something his old Ranger's engine turning over. Coughing once, twice, and then catching, holding running smoother than it had in months. He heard a voice say something, heard another voice respond, heard the competent satisfaction in both of them. His truck running. He put his hands flat on the table and pressed down lightly, steadying himself. There's something I have to tell you, Mike said. His voice had changed again, gone back to that careful, measured register. The men outside, not all of them are here about your truck. Sebastian looked at him. Some of them came because of what you did. The simple version man helped a brother, we show up to square it. Mike paused. But some of them came because word got to a few people who know about the Beale Street property and what I was thinking. He met Sebastian's eyes. And there's something else coming. Something I couldn't warn you about because I didn't know how many would show until this morning. How many? Sebastian said. Mike glanced toward the door, toward the sound of engines outside that had not diminished, had in fact grown the low collective rumble of it like something alive. More, Mike said. Sebastian followed his gaze to the door, and then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Danny's school, the main line, the number he knew, the one that only called when something was wrong. He picked it up. Mr. Bennett, the school secretary, her voice tight with something he couldn't read. Danny's fine, he's not hurt, but something's happened here and we need you to come in as soon as you can. What happened? She stopped, started again. There are motorcycles, Mr. Bennett. A lot of them. They're parked outside the school. Sebastian looked at Iron Mike across the kitchen table. Mike looked back at him and his expression carried something that might have been apology and might have been pride and was probably both. I think, Mike said quietly, you'd better come with me. Sebastian was in Mike's truck before he'd consciously decided to get in it. That was becoming a pattern with this man. The deciding happened somewhere below the level of thought in the part of Sebastian that still operated on reflex and instinct, and the kind of knowing that didn't need to explain itself. Mike drove. Sebastian sat in the passenger seat with his phone in his hand and watched Crescent Road scroll past, and the line of motorcycles that had been parked outside his trailer fell into formation behind them, without a word being spoken, without a signal that Sebastian could see, just the collective movement of men who had been doing this long enough that the choreography was in their blood. How many are at the school? Sebastian asked. Probably 20 by now, Mike said. Maybe more, but you sent them to my grandson's school. I sent them to make sure Danny knew what was happening before the school day got complicated. Mike kept his eyes on the road. Teenagers hear things fast. I didn't want him finding out from another kid that there were bikers outside his grandfather's trailer. Sebastian turned that over. It was, he admitted to himself, a thoughtful move. Annoying in its execution, but thoughtful at the core. He's going to have questions, Sebastian said. He's 16. He's going to have a lot of questions. Mike glanced at him. You want to answer them before I do? That's your call. But he's going to meet these men one way or another today. Sebastian looked out the window. He thought about Danny sitting in a classroom right now, probably aware that something was happening outside, probably holding himself together the way he always did, quiet, careful, not letting anything show until he understood it. The boy had learned that from somewhere. Sebastian suspected he'd learned it from watching his grandfather. He's a good kid, Sebastian said, quietly. Not to Mike specifically, just saying it. I know, Mike said. I looked into him too. Sebastian turned to look at him. I needed to know the whole picture, Mike said, not to bomber, to understand what I was dealing with. He paused. His grades are good, really good actually. His English teacher wrote something about him in a county essay competition last spring, called him a natural writer. Another pause. You know about that? Sebastian was quiet for a moment. He mentioned it. Did he tell you he won? Sebastian went very still. Third place county-wide, Mike said. $500 prize. You want to know what he did with it? Sebastian didn't answer because he already knew. He knew because the propane bill in October had been paid, and he hadn't paid it, and when he'd asked Danny about it, Danny had said he'd found a tutoring gig after school. Sebastian had believed him because he'd needed to believe him. He paid your heating bill, Mike said, not rubbing it in, just stating it the way you state a thing that deserves to be stated plainly. Kid won an essay contest and paid his grandfather's heating bill and didn't say a word about it. Sebastian pressed his mouth closed and looked out the windshield and held himself very still. He's a good kid, Mike said again, echoing Sebastian's words back, but with something added to them, something that meant he agreed and had evidence. Sebastian didn't trust himself to speak for a moment, so he didn't. They pulled up to Garfield High School. Danny had transferred there in September, when Jefferson District lines shifted and the site that met them was something Sebastian had no frame of reference for. 23 motorcycles, he counted later, parked along the front curb in a neat line, engines, off-riders, standing beside them in small clusters, talking quietly among themselves. They were not blocking the entrance. They were not approaching students. They were simply present, and their presence had done what the presence of 23 large men in Hell's Angels cuts will always do, which was to make the entire area around them very aware that they were there. A police cruiser was parked at the far end, one officer standing by his car, not approaching, just watching. Students were pressed against the school's front windows. Sebastian could see them faces at the glass phones out the particular electric collective energy of teenagers witnessing something they couldn't categorize. Mike parked. The convoy settled in behind them. "Let me go first," Sebastian said. Mike looked at him. "I need to find Danny before he finds this," Sebastian said. "Give me 5 minutes." Mike nodded. 5 minutes. Sebastian got out and walked to the school entrance, and the men along the curb watched him pass, and a few of them nodded the same way the men on Crescent Road had nodded, that small, deliberate acknowledgement that made Sebastian feel like he was being recognized for something he still wasn't entirely sure he'd done. The school's secretary, a woman named Pat, who Sebastian had met twice at parent nights, was at the front desk looking like a person who had started her morning expecting it to be ordinary and had been proven badly wrong. "Mr. Bennett," she said when she saw him. The relief in her voice was almost physical. "I need Danny," he said. "Can you pull him from class? He actually came to the office already. About 10 minutes ago. He saw them from the window in second period and asked to be excused." She pointed down the hall. "He's in the counselor's office. Ms. Reyes is with him." Sebastian walked down the hall. He knocked twice and opened the door. Danny was sitting in the chair across from Mrs. Reyes's desk, and he turned when Sebastian came in, and the look on his face was not fear. It was not panic. It was the controlled, careful expression of a boy who has learned to manage his reactions before he understands the situation, and underneath it, barely visible, was the particular vulnerability that only Sebastian ever saw the part of Danny that was still a kid who had lost too much too young and was always at some level waiting for the next thing to go wrong. "Grandpa." Danny stood up, just that, 2 syllables, everything in them. "I'm here," Sebastian said. "Sit down. I'll explain." Ms. Reyes, 30s professional, currently making an excellent effort to appear unrattled, looked at Sebastian with the expression of a woman who had about 40 questions and was choosing to hold all of them. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "do you want to tell me what's happening?" So Sebastian told her the short version, the highway the gas iron Mike Tommy in the hospital. He told it simply the way he told all things, without ornamentation. Miss Reyes listened. Danny listened, and as the story unfolded, the controlled, careful expression on his face shifted into something that was harder to define, something that moved through surprise and into something else, something older than surprise. When Sebastian finished, the room was quiet. Danny said, "You gave him your last gas." "I did." "And you walked home." "I did." "And then you lost your job." Sebastian nodded. Danny looked at his grandfather for a long moment. Sebastian braced for what the boy might say, for the weight of it, for the complicated mix of love and frustration and worry that 16-year-olds carried and sometimes couldn't keep inside. Danny said, "That sounds like you." Sebastian felt something loosen in his chest. "Yeah," he said, "I guess it does." "Are those guys safe?" Danny asked. Direct, practical, his grandmother's pragmatism somehow living in his generation. "I believe so," Sebastian said. "I think they came here to make sure you knew what was going on." "One of them texted me," Danny said. Sebastian blinked. "What?" Danny held up his phone. "This morning, unknown number. Said, 'Your grandfather did something real last night. We're going to make it right. Don't be scared when you see us.'" He looked at the phone, then at Sebastian. "I didn't know what it meant until I looked out the window." Sebastian made a mental note to discuss with Mike the etiquette of texting a man's 16-year-old grandson without warning. Then he set the note aside because there were larger things happening. "I want to meet them," Danny said. Miss Reyes cleared her throat. "I think the school's concern right now is—" "Can I take him for the day?" Sebastian asked her. "I'll get the absence excused, but I think," he looked at Danny, "I think he needs to be part of this." Ms. Reyes looked from Sebastian to Danny and then out her office window toward the front of the school where the sound of motorcycle engines, some of them starting up now, repositioning, filtered through the glass. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, "is your family in any danger?" "No," Sebastian said. He said it with the certainty of a man who had looked Iron Mike Gallagher in the eyes across a kitchen table and made an assessment. We're not. She thought about it for 3 seconds. Then she opened her desk drawer, pulled out an absence form, and signed it. One day, she said, bring him back tomorrow. They walked out of the school together, Sebastian and Danny, and the moment they came through the front door, and the sound of the motorcycles and the sight of the men along the curb hit them fully, Danny went still for just a second, one breath of pure adjustment, and then he kept walking. Mike was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He looked at Danny the way Sebastian imagined he looked at most things, direct assessing, taking the measure. Danny looked back at him the same way, which told Sebastian everything he needed to know about how the boy was doing. You're Danny, Mike said. You're Iron Mike, Danny said. Yeah. My grandfather told me about last night, Danny said. He said you need to get to your brother. I got there, Mike said. Tommy's stable. Danny nodded. A beat. Good. Another beat. He said you wouldn't take money. Mike looked at Sebastian. Sebastian kept his face neutral. He wouldn't take mine either, Mike said. Runs in the family, apparently. Danny almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. They drove from the school to Beale Street, Mike and Sebastian in the truck, Danny in the back seat, the convoy behind them. It took 11 minutes, and in those 11 minutes, Mike got 3 phone calls that he took on speaker without apology. Brief clipped exchanges with men. Sebastian didn't know about logistics. Sebastian was only beginning to understand. Equipment arriving, a supplier in Fresno confirming a parts order, someone named Boots, who was apparently handling the electrical situation at the Beale Street property. How long have you been planning this? Sebastian asked during a gap between calls. Since 4:30 this morning, Mike said. That's 3 hours. 3 hours is enough time when you know what you're doing and you know the right people. Mike said it without boast, just fact. And when people want to help. Why do they want to help? Sebastian asked. The others, the ones who came on their own. Mike was quiet for a moment. Because what you did is rare, he said. People talk about doing the right thing. They talk about it a lot. It's easy to talk about. He turned onto Beale Street. You didn't talk. You pulled over on a dark road and gave everything you had left to a stranger who probably scared you, and you walked away in the cold without asking for a thing. He looked straight ahead. That kind of thing moves people. It reminds them of something they want to be. Danny was quiet in his back seat. Sebastian could feel him listening. They pulled up to the Beale Street property, and the first thing Sebastian registered was not the building he'd known about that, but the number of people already there. Men in cuts moving in and out, a flatbed truck with equipment on it, what looked like a generator running, the sound of tools, the smell of concrete dust and oil that Sebastian recognized in his blood before his brain caught up with it. The smell of a working shop. He got out of the truck and stood on the sidewalk and took it in. A man detached from the group and came toward them, short, compact, somewhere in his 60s, with the kind of hands that told their own story. He stopped in front of Sebastian and stuck one of those hands out. Curtis Webb, the man said. I own this building. A pause. For a little while longer, anyway. He almost smiled. Mike tells me you're a mechanic. 22 years, Sebastian said. Curtis nodded. Come inside. Let me show you what you've got. What he had, as it turned out, was more than he'd expected. The 2 post-lift worked. Boots had gotten it running. It's green. An hour rewired, one connection, replaced a hydraulic line. The compressor needed a new motor, which was apparently already ordered and arriving tomorrow. The electrical panel needed work, but not as much as the building's age suggested. The floor was solid concrete, stained and scarred, and entirely functional. And the tools. As Sebastian walked through the space, he saw them accumulating in real time. Men bringing things in from trucks and trailers and truck beds, setting them in organized rows with the practiced efficiency of people who understood what went where. A full socket set. A floor jack that was newer than anything Sebastian had owned in years. A diagnostic scanner, current model, not cheap. An engine hoist, a parts washer. A cabinet of hand tools that together probably represented 3 or 4 mechanics' complete sets. He stopped in the middle of the floor and looked at what was being built around him for him, and he did not let himself get emotional because there was concrete dust in the air, and he was a 62-year-old man, and he had his grandson standing next to him, and he was not going to lose himself in front of all these people. He almost lost himself anyway. Grandpa, Danny's voice quiet beside him. I'm all right, Sebastian said. I know. Danny stood next to him, shoulder almost at his shoulder now the boy was getting tall. It's a good space. Yeah, Sebastian said. It is. Mike appeared at his side. Curtis has the lease paperwork. Month to month to start $400 option to convert to a purchase agreement after 12 months. His lawyer drew it up this morning. He paused. I told him you'd need to read it before you signed anything. Sebastian looked at him. Of course I need to read it. I know. Not defensive, just confirming that he knew. Sebastian read it, standing in the middle of the shop with the sounds of work happening around him, Danny reading over his shoulder, Curtis Webb standing nearby with the patience of a man who had already made his decision and was just waiting for the formality to catch up. It was fair, more than fair. $400 a month for a commercial space on Beale Street was below market, well below, and the purchase option was structured in a way that was designed to be reachable, not aspirational. Sebastian recognized good faith in legal language, the same way he recognized a clean weld. It had a quality that the alternatives didn't. He found the pen in his shirt pocket, the same pen he'd used to make his list of debts that morning. He signed his name. Curtis Webb shook his hand, and the handshake was firm and brief and said everything that needed saying. Then Mike's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his face changed the same fast change Sebastian had seen that morning when he'd mentioned Tommy, except this time it wasn't pain on the face, it was something else. Something sharp and not entirely readable. I have to take this, Mike said. He walked toward the back of the shop. Sebastian watched him go. He couldn't hear the words, just the tone, Mike's voice low and careful, the way it got when something required precision. Danny drifted toward a group of men who were sorting tools. Sebastian watched with half his attention as one of them, big man, red beard, probably 30, showed Danny something about the diagnostic scanner. Danny asked a question. The man answered. Danny asked another question. The man's whole posture changed the way people's postures change when they realize they're talking to someone who is actually paying attention. That was Danny. That was always Danny. Mike came back. His face was still carrying that new expression, and now Sebastian could see what it was: controlled urgency, the kind a man wears when he has news that is going to change the direction of a conversation. That was the hospital, Mike said. Sebastian's stomach dropped. Tommy woke up, Mike said. About an hour ago. He stopped. He's asking for me. Go, Sebastian said immediately. I'm going. Mike held Sebastian's gaze. But he said something when he woke up. The nurse related. He paused. She said the first coherent thing Tommy said was, did Mike make it in time? And when they told him yes, he said, then someone helped him. Find out who. Mike's jaw was tight. He wants to meet you. Sebastian looked at him. Not today, Mike said. He's not up for visitors beyond family today. But he asked by name while he asked for the man who helped. He stopped. I told the nurse your name. She told Tommy. He paused again. He cried Sebastian. My brother, who hasn't cried in front of another person since our mother's funeral, heard your name and cried. The shop was loud around them, tools and voices, and the sound of men working, but in the small radius around Sebastian and Mike, it was very still. You'll bring me when he's ready, Sebastian said. Yeah, Mike said. I will. A shout from the other side of the shop. Ricky Torrance, the engine man, Sebastian had been introduced briefly leaning out from under the hood of Sebastian's Ranger, which had been brought in on the flatbed while they were at the school. Mike, Ricky called, come look at this. They both walked over. Danny followed. Ricky straightened up. He was somewhere in his 40s, lean with oil already on his forearms, and the alert expression of a man who has just found something interesting in an engine. Fuel pumps shot, Ricky said, like we figured. But look at this. He pointed into the engine bay. Somebody rigged the fuel pressure regulator about 3 years ago, bypassed the factory spec. Whoever did it probably thought they were getting better performance. He shook his head. They were killing the pump instead. Slow but sure. He looked at Sebastian. This wasn't neglect, Ricky said. Somebody who didn't know what they were doing worked on this truck and caused the failure. It wasn't on you. Sebastian stood very still. He thought about 3 years ago. He thought about the shop on Pierce Street that wasn't his anymore, about the mechanic kid really 19 years old, who he'd let work on his own personal vehicles sometimes as training. He thought about explaining fuel pressure and watching the kid nod with the confidence of someone who had heard a thing and believed he'd understood it. He had never gone back to check the Ranger's regulator. He'd had other things to manage by then. Carol had been sick for 8 months. Not your fault, Ricky said again, reading something in Sebastian's face. And fixable. All of it fixable. How long, Sebastian asked. Give me tomorrow, Ricky said. She'll run better than she has in 5 years. Sebastian nodded. He put his hand briefly on the Ranger's front quarter panel, an old habit, the kind you develop with machines you've lived with long enough to know their moods. And then he stepped back. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, Bakersfield area code, he answered. Mr. Bennett, a man's voice professional with the clipped efficiency of someone who made a lot of calls. This is James Hobart. I'm the district superintendent for Bakersfield Unified. A pause. I've been made aware of your termination this morning, and I'm calling because another pause, shorter. I've received several calls in the last hour regarding your situation. Sebastian looked at Mike. Mike was watching him with no expression. Several calls, Sebastian repeated. Yes, from various community members. The superintendent's voice was carefully neutral. Mr. Bennett, I want to be transparent with you. The termination this morning was processed through a district-level staffing reduction, and in reviewing your file, I want to discuss whether that decision was handled correctly. I worked at Jefferson for 9 years, Sebastian said. Same thing he'd said to the principal. Still true. I'm aware of that, Hobart said. I'm also aware that your attendance record is essentially perfect. Your performance reviews are all satisfactory or above, and the timing of this morning's termination, given your documented vehicle trouble, raises some questions about the process. A pause. I'd like to schedule a meeting, this week if possible, to review the decision. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Mr. Hobart, he said, I appreciate the call. He looked around the shop at Ricky working on the Ranger, at Danny still talking to the red-bearded man at Curtis Webb in the corner, reviewing something on a clipboard, at the tools accumulating on the floor at the space that was his, that had his name on a lease in his shirt pocket. I'll take the meeting, but I want you to understand something first. Of course. I'm not sure I'll need the job back, Sebastian said, but I'd like the record to reflect that I didn't deserve to lose it the way I did. A longer pause from the superintendent's end. I think we can address that, he said quietly. Sebastian hung up. Mike was still watching him. Hobart called, Mike said. Not a question. You called the school superintendent, Sebastian said. I called 2 school board members, Mike said. They called Hobart. A beat. Community members. Sebastian looked at this man and felt the full weight of what was happening, not just today, not just the shop and the truck and the lease and the superintendent's call, but the whole architecture of it, the way Iron Mike Gallagher had spent the hours between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. building. Something systematic and thorough and designed to make sure that one act of kindness on a dark highway did not result in a 62-year-old man losing everything. You did all of this, Sebastian said, between 3 a.m. and now. I had help, Mike said. Mike. Sebastian. I need you to understand something. Sebastian kept his voice level because if he let it go, something was going to come out that he wouldn't be able to manage cleanly. I didn't give you that gas expecting any of this. I know. I didn't give it expecting anything. I know that too, Mike said it simply. That's the whole reason. The shop hummed around them. Tools and voices, and the smell of oil and concrete, and the particular energy of men who are good at what they do, doing it together. Danny laughed at something the red-bearded man said. A real laugh, unguarded, the laugh Sebastian hadn't heard in too long. Sebastian stood in the middle of it all and pressed his mouth closed and looked at the floor for a moment. Thank you, he said, to Mike, to the floor, to whoever was listening. Mike said nothing, but when Sebastian looked up, Mike had his hand extended. Sebastian took it, and Mike's grip was firm and brief and final, like the closing of something that had been open too long. Then Mike's phone buzzed again, and he looked at it, and his face did that thing, that shift, and Sebastian went still. What is it? Sebastian asked. Mike looked up. His expression was something Sebastian couldn't read, and he'd gotten reasonably good at reading this man in the last several hours. Tomorrow morning, Mike said, I need you and Danny here, early. He paused, and I need you to trust me one more time. Sebastian looked at him, at the phone, at the message he couldn't see. What's tomorrow morning? He asked. Mike put the phone in his pocket. Something you're not going to... Be ready for, he said, no matter how many times I try to prepare you. Sebastian didn't sleep well, which surprised him because the night before he'd been running on empty and collapsed without a fight. This night was different. This night his mind wouldn't settle. He lay in the dark and listened to the trailer breathe around him, the small sounds of a structure that had been holding itself together through cold and wind and the particular pressure of two people living carefully inside it. And he thought about the lease in his shirt pocket, which he'd folded and unfolded 3 times before bed. His name on it, Bennett Auto. He hadn't decided on the name yet officially, but in his head it was already the same name it had been on Pierce Street, because some things don't change just because circumstances do. He thought about Danny. The boy had been quiet on the ride home, which was not unusual. Danny processed things internally, always had the same way Sebastian did, but when they'd gotten back to the trailer and Sebastian had started making dinner, Danny had sat at the kitchen table and watched him cook, and after a while he'd said, "Do you think it'll work?" The shop, Sebastian had thought about it honestly before answering. "I think it has a chance," he said, "a real one." "That's different from before," Danny said. "Yeah," Sebastian said. "It is." Danny was quiet again. "Then I'm going to learn, if that's okay. After school weekends. I want to learn the work." Sebastian had kept his eyes on the pan. "You've got school." "I know, I'm not dropping school." A pause. "But I want to learn it. From you." Sebastian had turned around and looked at his grandson. Then this boy who had paid a heating bill with essay prize money and never said a word, who had stood in a shop full of bikers and asked questions and listened to the answers, who had looked Iron Mike Gallagher in the eyes and spoken to him straight, and he'd felt something that was too large to have a clean name, so he just let it be large. "Yeah," he'd said, "all right." Now it was 5:15 in the morning, and Mike had said early, and Sebastian understood that early to a man like Mike probably meant before the rest of the world decided to have opinions about things. He got up dressed, started the coffee, stood at the counter and drank it in the dark the way he'd done 10,000 mornings before this one, except this morning was not like those mornings, because this morning he had a lease in his shirt pocket, and a truck that Ricky Torrance had spent 12 hours on yesterday, and a meeting with Iron Mike at a shop on Beale Street, and somewhere across town, Tommy Gallagher was breathing in a hospital bed. And all of it, every single thread of it, traced back to a red plastic gas can on a dark highway. He knocked on Danny's door at 5:30. "Get up. We need to go." Danny was dressed in 4 minutes, which was a record. They drove to Beale Street in the Ranger. The engine ran smooth. Ricky had been right, it ran better than it had in years. A steady, confident idle that felt like a different vehicle. Sebastian kept his hands loose on the wheel and listened to it and felt something he hadn't felt behind the wheel of this truck in a long time, which was trust. They turned onto Beale Street. Sebastian stopped the truck. He stopped it because what was on Beale Street at 5:50 in the morning was not what he'd left behind yesterday afternoon, and his brain needed a moment to reconcile the two images. Yesterday, there had been a shop, a cleaned out, cleared up, newly equipped shop with the bones of something real in it. Today, there were people. Not the same men from yesterday, not the crew who'd brought the tools and run the electrical new people, more people. Trucks parked along both sides of the street. Men in cuts, yes, but also men without them. Guys in work clothes, guys. Sebastian didn't recognize a few women moving with purpose. The kind of organized energy that belongs to people who have shown up to do a specific thing and know exactly what that thing is. And in the center of all of it, parked directly in front of the shop with his engine off and its chrome catching the early light, was his Ranger. Except it wasn't just his Ranger anymore. Someone had detailed it. Not just washed detailed, the kind of careful, thorough attention that took hours every surface gone over until the old truck looked like something a man would be proud to drive, like something that declared its continued presence in the world. Danny said from the passenger seat, "Grandpa." "I see it," Sebastian said. He parked and got out. Mike was waiting by the shop door, coffee in hand, wearing the same cut as always, looking like a man who had not slept and was not bothered by that fact. "You said early?" Sebastian said. "You're on time." Mike looked at Danny. "Morning." "Morning," Danny said. He was looking at the people, the trucks, the organized activity. "How many people are here?" "More coming," Mike said simply. Sebastian looked at him. "Mike, what's happening this morning?" Mike looked back at him with that measured expression, the one that meant he was deciding how much to front load and how much to let arrive on its own terms. Then he made his decision. Come inside, he said. Inside the shop, the tools from yesterday had been arranged properly. Not just set down, but organized the way a working shop organizes itself when the people doing it know what they're doing. Someone had put up a pegboard overnight. Someone had labeled the circuit breakers on the electrical panel in clean block letters. The diagnostic scanner was mounted on a rolling cart. The floor had been swept. It looked like a shop that had been running for years. It looked like what Sebastian had built on Pierce Street before everything. Standing near the back talking to Ricky Torrance was a man Sebastian didn't recognize. Somewhere in his 50s, medium build, wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, which was the universal signal of a man who normally wore a full suit but was trying to seem approachable. He turned when Mike and Sebastian came in. Mike said, "Sebastian, this is Alan Briggs. He's with the small business development center out of Bakersfield." Alan Briggs stuck out his hand. Sebastian shook it. "Mr. Bennett," Briggs said, "I've heard a lot about you in the last 24 hours. He had the voice of a man who was used to sitting across desks from people and delivering news, either good or bad, with the same level tone. "I'd like to talk to you about some things, if you have a few minutes." "What kind of things?" Sebastian asked. "Licensing," Briggs said. "Insurance certifications, business registration, the practical infrastructure of opening a legitimate shop." He paused. "We have a program for small business owners who are relaunching, grants and low-interest loans, state-funded specifically for tradespeople. Given your background, your experience, your certifications, which by the way are lapsed but not expired, meaning reinstatement, is a process, not a barrier, you'd qualify." Another pause. "Easily." Sebastian looked at Mike. "I didn't set this up," Mike said. "Alan heard about the shop from Curtis Webb. He came on his own." Briggs nodded, confirming. "Curtis and I go back. He told me what was happening here." He looked around the shop. "I've been doing this work for 15 years, Mr. Bennett. I've helped a lot of businesses get started. I've seen a lot of situations." He stopped. "I've never seen something like this happen in one day. Whatever you did to deserve this." He gestured at the shop, at the people outside, at the whole improbable morning. "It's something." Sebastian didn't say anything for a moment. Then Danny said from beside him, "He gave a man his last gallon of gas." Briggs looked at Danny, then back at Sebastian. "That's all." "That's all?" Sebastian said. Briggs looked at him for a long beat. "All right," he said, "then let's get you legal." They sat in the office, a small room off the main floor that someone had furnished overnight, with a folding table and 2 chairs, which struck Sebastian as both absurd and completely in keeping with how this whole situation had operated. And Alan Briggs walked him through the paperwork with the efficiency of a man who knew exactly which forms mattered and which ones were just friction. Sebastian read everything. He always read everything. Briggs didn't rush him. By the time they came back out to the main floor, something had shifted outside. Sebastian heard it before he understood it. The sound building from somewhere down the street, the deep collective rumble that he'd heard on Crescent Road yesterday morning when he'd opened his front door and found Mike's convoy. Except this was bigger. This was substantially bigger, the sound of it coming up through the concrete floor and into Sebastian's boots and through his legs and settling somewhere in his chest like a second heartbeat. Danny heard it too. He turned toward the door. Mike was already there, standing in the open doorway looking out. Sebastian crossed the floor and stood beside him. Beale Street, already populated with trucks and people, and the organized morning energy of what had been building since before dawn, was about to change. Sebastian could feel it coming, the way you feel whether not seeing it yet, just the pressure shift, the quality of the air before the event. The first bikes came around the corner at the far end of the street. Then more. Then more after that. Sebastian counted to 30 and stopped counting because the counting wasn't the point. They came in formation, organized by some protocol he didn't know, chrome and leather, and the collective sound of engines that had been built and maintained by people who understood machines, the way Sebastian understood machines, with care, with attention, with the particular respect you develop for something that carries you. They filled the street, both lanes as far as Sebastian could see, the line of them stretching back around the corner and out of sight. 100 machines, maybe more, the sound of them reverberating off the buildings on both sides in a way that Sebastian felt in his back teeth. And they were stopping, parking. Engines shutting down one by one, the sound diminishing in waves until the street was full of machines and men, and a silence that felt significant in the way that silences do when they follow something immense. Danny was standing next to Sebastian, his shoulder pressed against his grandfather's arm. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "that's a lot of people." "Yeah," Sebastian said, "it is." Mike stepped off the curb and walked to the center of the street with the ease of a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. He turned to face the shop. He looked at Sebastian. "You want to know what this is?" Mike said. His voice was loud enough to carry not quite a shout, just the voice of a man who knew how to be heard. "I'd like to understand it, yeah," Sebastian said. "This is a customer base," Mike said. "Every man on this street, every brother from every chapter who could get here by this morning has been told about this shop and this man. And every one of them has been told by me personally that when they need work done, they bring it here first." He paused. "Not because we owe you. We do, but that's separate. Because word got around about who you are and what you do, and in our world, a man who does honest work and keeps his word is worth more than any amount of money we could hand you." The street was very quiet. Mike kept going. "You were a mechanic for 22 years. You built something honest. You lost it for the right reasons. And then last week you were driving home on an empty tank with your last dollar to your name, and you still pulled over for a stranger." His voice hadn't gone soft. It was just level and clear and completely without performance. "That's who you are. It's been who you are your whole life." Sebastian held himself very still. "So this," Mike gestured at the street at the men at the shop behind Sebastian, "this isn't charity. This isn't a reward. This is what it looks like when the right people find out about the right man." One of the men on a bike near the front, big gray-bearded, wearing sergeant-at-arms colors, Sebastian vaguely recognized, started it. He put both hands together once, twice. Not applause, something more deliberate than applause. And then the men around him did the same, and it spread down the street in a wave that was not loud but was absolutely present, this rhythmic, deliberate sound of 100 men acknowledging something in the only way that felt proportionate. Sebastian looked at the street. He looked at Danny, who was watching with his jaw tight and his eyes bright in the way that meant he was managing himself. "You okay?" Sebastian asked him low. Danny nodded. Then, "Are you—" Sebastian thought about it. He thought about Carol because he always thought about Carol in moments like this, in moments where something happened that she would have needed to hear about, that she would have reacted to with that particular combination of wonder and practicality that he'd loved in her. He thought about what she would have said if he'd called her from that highway and told her he'd given away their last gallon of gas to a Hell's Angel. She would have said, "Well, what else were you going to do?" That was Carol. That had always been Carol. The question wasn't whether to help. The question was why you were still standing there talking about it instead of helping. He'd married the right woman. He'd just had her for 31 years instead of 60, and the missing years were a loss he carried and would carry, and standing here on this street in front of a shop with his name on the lease couldn't change that. Nothing could change that. But this was something. It was genuinely, specifically something. "Yeah," Sebastian said, "I'm okay." Mike walked back to him. Behind Mike, men were getting off their bikes, and the organized morning energy was shifting into something more social, more permanent, people moving toward the shop, people talking. Someone had appeared with a table and was setting up coffee, which in Sebastian's experience was the universal signal that a group of people had decided they were staying for a while. "There's one more thing," Mike said. He stopped in front of Sebastian, and his expression was the careful one again. The one Sebastian had learned meant something was coming that needed to be received properly. "Tommy," Sebastian said. "He got discharged this morning," Mike said, 40 minutes ago, against doctor's advice technically, but they couldn't stop him. He's stable, he's mobile, and he told the nurses he had somewhere to be." Sebastian looked at the street. He looked at the line of bikes. He looked at the shop behind him with its clean floor and its organized tools, and his name not yet on the sign but already in his chest. "He's coming here," Sebastian said. "He's already here," Mike said. Sebastian turned. At the edge of the gathered crowd, just stepping off a motorcycle being ridden by someone else, because Tommy Gallagher was in no condition to ride his own post-procedure stabilize, but not there yet, was a man who looked like Mike, the way a river looks like the mountain it came from. Smaller, younger by a decade, moving carefully with the particular stiffness of someone whose body had recently been through something serious and was making its recovery felt in every step. But he was walking. He was upright. He was crossing the street towards Sebastian with the deliberate pace of a man who had somewhere important to be and was getting there. He stopped in front of Sebastian. He looked at him for a moment. This 62-year-old man in a thermal undershirt and worn work pants, who had given away his last gallon of gas on a dark highway and walked home in the cold and lost his job before breakfast and signed a lease in a shop that didn't exist yesterday morning. Tommy Gallagher stuck out his hand. "I'm told," he said, his voice still carrying the rough edges of recent hospital time, "that you're the reason I'm standing here." Sebastian took his hand. "Your brother got there in time," he said. "That's the reason. He got there because of you." Sebastian didn't argue it. Some things you could argue forever, and the truth would stay where it was, patient and immovable. "How are you feeling?" Sebastian asked. Tommy almost laughed. "Like I had emergency heart surgery 36 hours ago." He looked around at the street, at the shop, at the assembled bikes and men, and the improbable fact of all of it. "Mike told me what happened. All of it." He looked back at Sebastian. "You should know I'm a contractor, commercial construction. I've built things in this city for 20 years. He paused. "I owe you a debt I can't pay, but I can pay forward. You need anything built, anything improved, anything structural in this shop that needs doing." He stopped. "You call me, not as payment, as a neighbor." Sebastian looked at him, at Mike, at Danny standing beside him, taking all of this in with that quiet, careful attention that was the best thing Sebastian knew about his grandson. "All right," Sebastian said, "I'll call you." The morning moved on, the way mornings do, not in a straight line, but in the accumulating way of real things, one moment adding to the next. Men introduced themselves. Cards changed hands. Ricky Torrance pulled Sebastian aside to walk him through everything he'd done to the Ranger, with the enthusiasm of a man who loved an engine problem and loved solving it more. Alan Briggs finished his coffee and shook Sebastian's hand again and left with a promise to follow up on the grant application by end of week. Curtis Webb signed his copy of the lease and folded it into his jacket pocket and told Sebastian he'd made a good call, and Sebastian said he agreed, and they both understood that they were talking about more than the lease. Danny spent the morning talking to anyone who would talk to him. Sebastian watched him move through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd found his footing, asking questions, listening, occasionally saying something that made the person he was talking to laugh or nod seriously, or both. One of the older men, someone's chapter president, Sebastian, gathered from the way the others deferred to him, spent 20 minutes with Danny talking about something Sebastian couldn't hear, and at the end of it, the man put his hand on Danny's shoulder and said something that made the boy stand up a little straighter. Sebastian watched that and felt the full weight of what had shifted, not just for himself, for Danny, for what Danny was watching and learning about what a man could be and how the world could work when people decided to make it work that way. Around 10 o'clock, the crowd began to thin. Men with places to be worked to get back to miles to cover. The departures were gradual and then faster, the street emptying in the same direction it had filled until Beale Street was quiet again, except for a few trucks still parked in a small group, including Mike, Tommy, Ricky, and Danny standing in front of the shop. Mike looked at Sebastian. "You need anything else?" he asked. Sebastian looked at the shop, at the sign that wasn't there yet but would be, at the tools on the floor, the lift that worked, the compressor with its new motor arriving tomorrow, the lease in his pocket with his name on it in his own handwriting. "No," he said. "I think I've got what I need." Mike nodded. He started to turn away, then stopped. He reached into his cut and pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out. Sebastian took it, unfolded it. It was a list of names, 23 names with phone numbers beside each one, and beside each number a note, make, model, year, and a brief description of what the vehicle needed. "First month's work," Mike said. "Guaranteed, more after that." Sebastian looked at the list. 23 vehicles, enough to cover the lease, the insurance, the first round of supplies, and then some. Enough to start, a real start, the kind with traction under it. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket next to the lease. "Thank you," he said. Mike looked at him the way he'd looked at him across the kitchen table that morning. Direct, final, something settled in it. "You already said that," Mike said. "I mean it differently now," Sebastian said. Mike almost smiled. The closest he came to it, that particular almost, and Sebastian had decided it was enough. Some men's almost was better than other men's full. "Get to work," Mike said. "You've got a business to run." He walked to his bike. Tommy followed, moving carefully. They didn't look back because men like that don't look back when the business is done, and the business was done, not finished. Not closed, but settled the way a debt gets settled when both parties understand what it was worth. Sebastian stood in front of the shop on Beale Street and watched them go. Danny came to stand beside him. "What do we do now?" Danny asked. Sebastian looked at the shop, at the tools waiting inside, at the list of 23 names in his pocket, at the morning still early, still full of hours, the kind of morning that had enough room in it for real work to begin. "We open the shop," Sebastian said. He turned and walked inside, and Danny followed. And behind them, the street was quiet and the sun was up and the day was beginning. And for the first time in 2 years, Sebastian Bennett walked through a door that was his and felt the ground solid under his feet. A man who gives everything away when he has nothing left doesn't lose. He just doesn't know yet what he's about to receive.